Yahudah returns when Syria and Palestine fall. Yahudah returns when Syria and Palestine fall. Our keynote scriptures are Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 53 through 61, which state, when I shall bring again their captivity, the captivity of Sodom and her daughters, and the captivity of Samaria and her daughters. Then will I bring again the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them, that thou mayest bear thine own shame and mayest be confounded in all that thou hast done, and that thou art a comfort unto them. When thy sisters, Sodom and her daughters, shall return to their former state, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former state, then thou and thy daughters shall return to your former state. For thy sister Sodom was not mentioned by thy mouth in the day of thy pride, before thy wickedness was discovered, as at the time of thy reproach of the daughters of Syria, and all that are round about her, the daughters of the Palestinians, which despise you round about. Thou hast borne thine lewdness and thine abomination, said Yahuwah. Thus saith Adonai Yahuwah, I will deal with you as you have done, which has despised the oath in breaking the covenant. Nevertheless, I will remember my covenant with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish unto you an everlasting covenant. Then thou shalt remember thy ways and be ashamed when thou shalt receive thy sisters, thine elder and thy younger, and I will give them unto thee for daughters, but not by thy covenant. And I will establish my covenant with thee, that thou might know that I am Yahweh, that thou mayest remember and be confounded, and never open thy mouth anymore because of thy shame, when I am pacified toward thee for all that thou hast done, saith Adonai Yahweh. In verses 1 through 3 of Ezekiel 16, Yah is addressing the exiles of Judah by the name of Jerusalem, which was the capital of our ancient kingdom of Judah, as stated, verse 1, 2, and 3 of Ezekiel. Again, the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations, and say, Thus saith Adonai Yahweh unto Jerusalem. All right. Also, another sign that Yah gives us regarding the time of our return to Israel is that when Yahudah returns to the land, there will already be two states of people that will already be in our land. And they are called Sodom and Samaria. And that Yahudah will move into their midst, as stated in verse 53 through 55 of Ezekiel 16, which stated, when I shall bring again their captivity, the captivity of Sodom and her daughters, and the captivity of Samaria and her daughters, then I will bring again the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them. Now, when he says, then I will bring again the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them, he's talking about you. All right, continuing on. He's talking about you, the people of Yahudah, Judah. Continue on with verse 54. He's saying he's bringing us into the midst of two other captivities that get there before we do to the land. And He says in verse 54, he's doing it because that thou mayest bear thine own shame and mayest be confounded in all that thou hast done, in that thou art a comfort unto them when thy sister Sodom and her daughters shall return to their former state, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former state. Then you and your daughters shall return to your former state. Notice it declares in these 3 verses in chapter 16 of Ezekiel, verses 53, 54, and 55, that 2 states will be in our land when we, the people of Yahudah, return to the land. Now, these 2 states are also called captivities that return to the land as national states again. And we'll pick up here at verse 53, which states in verse 53, the captivity that returns first is called in verse 53, the captivity of Sodom, which is quite interesting. Wasn't Sodom destroyed? Then how can Sodom come back from a captivity if it was all destroyed? Well, yes, Sodom was destroyed, but there were some survivors. Because when Sodom was destroyed, the only survivors were the family of the patriarch Lot. All right. From this family of Lot came the ancient nations of Moab and Ammon, who lived on the eastern borders of the land of Israel east of the Jordan River. All right. Now, the prophet Jeremiah says this regarding the captivity of Moab. He says in chapter 48 of Jeremiah, verse 46 through 47, in the book of Jeremiah, he says, woe be unto thee, O Moab, the children of Chemosh perisheth, for thy sons are taken captives, and thy daughters captives. Yet I will bring again the captivity of Moab in the latter days, saith Yahudah. Thus far is the judgment of Moab. So some of the captivity of Sodom is referring to what remains of the ancient people of Moab. Moab being one of the descendants of Lot. Okay, but also the prophet Jeremiah says this regarding the captivity of Ammon, who is also an offspring of the family of Lot. It says in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 6, afterward, I will bring again the captivity of the children of Ammon, said Yahudah. So here we see Yahudah saying, Yahudah, Yah is saying, in the latter days, in the after days, I'm bringing back the captivity of Sodom, and the only captivity of Sodom that Yah could bring back will be the captivities of Moab and Ammon. These are the descendants of Lot. And so now we must assess what this means, because he says he will bring the captivity of Sodom back in the latter days, in the after days, in the last days. So this is a very intriguing prophecy that makes you scratch your head and wonder what's going on with this. So in Ezekiel chapter 53, verse 16, these 2 branches of the family of Lot, called the Ammonites and the Moabites, who were the surviving people of ancient Sodom, they are called the captivity of Sodom, whom Jeremiah says in chapter 48 of his prophecy, verse 47, that this captivity of Sodom will return to statehood in the latter days. That is, they will come back and be a nation again. Now, that's fascinating. And in these latter days, the only nation that fits that description is the current Shemitic or Hashemite nation state of Jordan. Jordan comprises the territories, the nation of Jordan comprises the territories of ancient Moab and Ammon. And we know for a fact that Moab and Ammon were in the area of what is today called Jordan, because there's an archaeological discovery there called the Mesha Stela, which is a tower that a king of Moab named Mesha, who's cited in the book of 2 Kings chapter 3. He inscripted on there, writing, talking about his fight with the war with the king of the Israelites. And that archaeological stone is called the Mesha Stela, or the Moab Stela, which means a slab where there was some engravings from that ancient time. And this was found in the land of Jordan. Jordan also comprises today some of the section of the ancient boundaries of the land of Israel east of the Jordan River. As we remember, when Moshe brought us to the promised land, he could not cross over the Jordan, but he came as close to the Jordan River, but he was not allowed to cross over the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. But as we remember, he gave 3 tribes their inheritance property on the eastern side of the Jordan. These 3 tribes were Gad, Reuben, and the part of the tribe of Manasseh. They inherited on the east side of the Jordan. That all of that east side of Jordan, though, today is in the boundaries of the nation of Jordan today. And so within the boundaries of your land and my land, in the boundaries of the nation of Jordan, is part of our land where the Jordanian state now occupies, the captivity of Sodom. So Jordan is the captivity of Sodom that's in your land right now. They're one of 2 other people that are in our land right now. All right. Now, the Jordanian state came into existence as an independent nation in 1946, and thus fulfilled the return of the captivity of Sodom, referred to in Ezekiel 16:53, because the Jordanian state comprises the boundaries of ancient Israel east of the Jordan, and it comprises the boundaries of what were once Moab and Ammon, who were the descendants of Lot and were the survivors of the destruction of Sodom. So they are the captivity of Sodom. And in 1946, they were under British colonialism. And in 1946, they became an independent nation, which was also the latter-day fulfillment of Jeremiah 48 and verse 47, and also in Jeremiah 49 verse 6, which spoke of a latter-day fulfillment of the return of the captivity of Moab and Ammon, who are also called by Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 53 as the return of the captivity of Sodom, which was fulfilled in 1946 with the birth of the nation of Jordan. Even today, the current capital of Jordan is called Ammon, which was the name of the father of the ancient Amorites, as cited in Genesis chapter 19, verse 38. Currently, there is a gathering of Hebrews into Jordan right now. There are some Israelites that are moving to Jordan because they believe this prophecy. And they have sites up on YouTube called A Gathering in Jordan. Some of you may have seen it. Some well-known Israelites are there that are musicians that I like their music. They now have moved to Jordan. And so Judah is moving in the midst of these people that are already there because part of our land is in Jordan. So since the Israelis aren't allowing us to move in to the western side of the Jordan, many of us decide, well, we'll move into our land on the eastern side of the Jordan River and move into Jordan. So there's a growing number of Israelites moving in. And this is fulfilling the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 53. There's not a lot of talk about this fulfillment of prophecy. It's not as a well-known prophecy, but it's interesting and intriguing to look into it. And when I finish this review, I'm looking forward to getting your questions and insights about this. So the returning captivity of Sodom, which is the nation of Jordan today, fulfills what Yah said he would do in returning the captivity of Sodom, mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 53, who would be present in the midst of the land of Israel at the time of the return of the captivity of Judah. And now, since Jordan occupies the section of the land of Israel east of the Jordan River, some of Judah has started moving into Jordan. Right now, I could name some of the people that have moved in there. Primarily, it's a lot of people from the upper East Coast, from New York and Philly. And I'm in touch with some of them and talk with some of them. They're saying all of us need to move there. Well, I'm not quite ready to do that yet, but I can understand where they're coming from. Also, in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 53, it mentions another state called Samaria will be in the midst of the land of Israel just before we, the people of Yahudah, return. Now, just as Sodom, so too Samaria is referred to as coming out of captivity as well. Now, Samaria was historically the capital of the 10 northern tribes of the kingdom of Israel that was taken out of the land of Israel into captivity by the Assyrian Empire in 720 BC. That's 2,700 years ago. And in 720 BC, the Assyrian Empire attacked the northern tribes' capital of Samaria. That was once the capital seat of the rulers of the northern tribes, rulers like Ahab and Jezebel, and other rulers like that ruled in that area. The Assyrians attacked Samaria, sacked it, and exiled the northern tribes, the 10 tribes, in 720 BC, as stated in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 5 through 6, which states, "Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Hala and in Habar by the river Gozan and in the cities of the Medes." According to 2 Kings, the captivity of Samaria was carried away in captivity northward into the regions of Central Asia and the Caucasus Mountains. The northern tribes of Israel were traditionally called Ephraim, according to Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 19, which states, say unto them, thus saith Adonai Yahweh, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows, and will put them with him. So the captivity of Samaria, referred to in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 53, is a clear reference to the return of the northern tribes of Israel to the land of Israel. And they will, it says, establish their own state in the land of Israel as well before you, the people of Yahudah, return, according to what we're reading in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 53. Now, let's look at who the captivity of Samaria is that's being spoken of here. Based on the genetic research of the University of California, Berkeley geneticist, Dr. Morjani, who is from India, she discovered that 3 to 5% of modern Israelis who came to the land of Israel from the northern regions of Eastern Europe, the Caucasus Mountains, and Central Asia, that 3 to 5% of these Jewish people have ancient Hebrew Israelite DNA, whereas 95 to 97% of them do not have any ancient Israelite bloodline. So it is clear that Ezekiel 16:53 is calling this 3 to 5% of the modern Israeli Jewish people that they are of the ancient Israelite DNA of E1B1A. Now, this is science talking. This isn't theory. This is science talking. And that evidently this 3 to 5% of the Israelis in the state of Israel, they're looked upon by the prophecy of Ezekiel 16:53 as referring to the phrase, the return of the captivity of Samaria. Now, a lot of us will wonder, well, I thought the ancient Israelites were black and the Israelis are white, but yes, however, outer shell physical appearances sometimes do not tell the inner genetic evidence. And because of the research of that Dr. Merjani has done, it's clear that at some point the ancient Israelites of the northern tribes, whose capital was Samaria, of course, were black, but they moved up into northern hemispheric areas among Caucasian people. For further reference on that history, our dear brother and friend Dante Fortson, some of you may be familiar with his site. He has a wonderful site called Black Khazars. Go to that site. What Dante Fortson has done with his very popular site has even been noted by our dear brother Benai Israel as really being a great reference. Dante has actually gotten hold of a document from Malabar Jews in India from the Middle Ages who report that they knew of black Jews living among the Khazars of Central Asia. As you know, the Khazars, according to Dr. Elhak, the Jewish geneticist, the Khazars are primarily the ancestors of 95 to 90% of the Jewish people, the Khazars. So that, with that said, though, people wonder then, why is it that of modern Israelis, of the state of Israel, there's some of them that are 3 to 5% of them have E1B1A Hebrew Israelite blood DNA. Well, it's clear that, and I've got a picture here, I'm going to show you some of, and there are some of the ancient Israelites that continue to move around as Black people in Central Asia and the regions of Khazaria and Iran and Azerbaijan and Armenia and those, and they still retain their Blackness, but over centuries, since 2,700 years ago, they had to have intermixed with some of those people there. I've got a picture of some of these Black ancient Israelites as late as 1900 AD, still being seen in those regions of the Khazars. And this is a picture. Can you see this? Can everybody see this picture? I want you to notice this picture right here. Now, this is a picture of Black Sumerian Jews, Hebrews. This picture was taken in the year 1900 on the border of Iran, northwestern Iran, and its border with Azerbaijan and Central Asia. All of that's the range of the realm of the people known as the Khazars that Kussler talked about in the book 13th Tribe. But some of the Khazars mixed with these ancient Israelites. The name of this picture is Jews at the Marketplace in 1900. That was taken in a marketplace in that area. Notice how they're dressed. They got their camels right there. They look mixed, but look at them. Some of them are just straight up Black, like these brothers back there in the back. They just look straight up Black. But you see, over 2,700 years since the Syrian exile, some of them have gotten a little mixed up somewhat more, but you can still see this is a people of color here. They don't look like Jewish people today. Yet, there's 3 to 5% of the Jewish people that got some of this blood in them. And this is the E1B1A DNA the Hebrew Israelites have here in America. So, see, the word of Yah is true. We just have to, the glory of Yah, sometimes in prophecies like this, is his glory to hide a lot of things, but it's your glory, the glory of royalty, to dig it up. Well, that's all we're doing, is just digging it up so it can be seen. All right. And so, as stated in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 53, when Yahudah's captivity returns, the other two captivities of Sodom and Samaria will already be back in the land. And Yahudah returns to the land in the midst of these other two captivities, as stated in verses 53 through 55, where Yah says, "Then will I bring again the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them," in the midst of the captivities of Sodom and the captivities of Samaria. And Yah continues to explain why he's bringing us back into land. Last, verse 54, "that thou mayest bear thine own shame and mayest be confounded in all that thou hast done, and that thou art a comfort unto them, when thy sister Sodom and her daughters shall return to their former state, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former state. Then thou and thy daughters shall return to your former state." Now, based on these three verses in Ezekiel 16, verses 53, 54, and 55, based on these three verses in Ezekiel 16, we see that the first two captivities to return to the land of Israel, they form states. That's what it says in verse 55. It says in some versions says their former estate, but then in the ancient Targum's text, it just says their former state. So they've attained some kind of national identity in the land of Israel, even before Judah comes back. Now, the returning captivity of Sodom formed the state of Jordan in 1946, which the state of Jordan, it encompasses portions of the land of Israel east of the Jordan River, where the three tribes of Reuben, Gad, and some of Manasseh were located. All right, now, the returning captivity of Samaria evidently is referring to the 3 to 5% of the Israeli populace that actually do have ancient Israelite bloodlines, though 97 to 95% of the Israelis don't have any ancient Israelite bloodline. But there's some of them that have the bloodlines of some of these we see in this picture here. These people in this picture have E1B1A. These are people related to you. Some people call them the Seedies. There's paper, Dante Fortson did a real good research on that, and our dear brother Benaiah Israel did some more research about this, and we've discussed this, and it's rather fresh, new information that we have to investigate and look into, leave no stone unturned. Now, Yah testifies to those 3 to 5% of the Israeli populace that they came back and formed and became part of the state of Israel in 1948. And so even though 95 to 97% of the Israelis are not Israelites by ancient bloodlines, there's 3 to 5% of them that are. That would mean like there's roughly about 8 to 9 million Israelis, population-wise, in the state of Israel. And yet, only 3 to 5% of them actually come from the Israelite bloodlines that come through these ancient northern tribes of Israel that you see in this picture here that were Black, that were borne witness to by the Malabar Jews of India. We said there were some Black Jews floating around up around the Caucasus and in the regions of the Khazars. All right. Well, Yah testifies to Judah that he allowed the captivities of these people to come back before Judah comes back. And that 3 to 5%, if you say there's about 8 or 9 million Israelis population, or even as much as 10 million, that would mean that roughly about 600,000 people in the state of Israel have ancient Hebrew Israelite bloodlines. And this would also include those of our people there in Dimona that are there, and even among the Beta Israel, the so-called Falasha, Ethiopian Jews. All right. They would form about 600,000, 700,000 people in the state of Israel today. That's not a huge number, but that's not a small number either. And Ezekiel, the Most High, is reporting that he recognizes them as part of a state that emerges before you, Yahudah, come back into the land in full force. Now, we notice that Yah saying he's doing this, that in verse 54, this way that we may bear our shame, in verse 54, that we may be confounded in all that we had done, speaking of our forefathers, and that we are comforted to them. Because see, Yahudah initially was living more righteous than Samaria. We were living more righteous than the Ammonites and the Moabites, but then we fell back and acted worse than they did and became more corrupt than them So Yah said, because our forefathers did that, then these other people will come back to our land before we do. That's what he says. And then in verse 55, when thy sisters, Sodom and her daughters shall return to their former state, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former state, then thou and thy daughters shall return to your former state. For thy sister Sodom was not mentioned by thy mouth in the day of thy pride. So we used to look down on the record of the history of the Sodomites, but these days, many of our people are leading the homosexual movement. So you see, y'all saying for that reason, I'm bringing you all back last. Y'all can't look down on nobody. We've been as disgustingly corrupt in our behavior than anybody. And yet, y'all expect so much more from us than this. So in verse 57 of Ezekiel, chapter 16, Yah gives the timeline when Yahudah returns back to our land. You know, many of us have been looking at when is the time that we actually go back. And this is one of these rare sections in scripture where it actually tells you when you're going to go back. I mean, the timeline. See, the 400-year prophecy, all it tells you is that after 400 years, Yah would judge this land, which immediately happened when COVID, when we crossed the 400-year milestone in 2019, immediately COVID came and started breaking this country down. All right? Immediately. All right, now, but he never told us how long he would judge this land before he would actually take us out of this land to put us in our own land. That prophecy of the 400 years in Genesis 15 doesn't tell us how long he will be judging this land before he brings us out of this land. It just says, after the 400 years, I will judge that land. But he doesn't tell us how long. But this prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 16, it actually gives us a timeline of a series of events to watch, which will show you when it's the time for you to leave it. Now, in the Targum text, which is the ancient Aramaic text of Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 57, it states that the time of our return to our homeland of the land of Israel happens when, quote, the villages of Syria and the villages of the Palestinians have been put to shame, who despised you from all sides. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 57, the ancient Aramaic Targum version text. Currently, as Israelites, we are not connected to the Zionist state of Israel. This Targum text tells us that we are nonetheless despised by the neighboring peoples of Syria and the Palestinians who live around the land of Israel today, because those people over there, they cannot differentiate between Hebrew Israelites from the Israeli Jewish people of the state of Israel. They just hear Israel and they don't take time to investigate that there's a difference between Hebrew Israelites and Israelis. So they despise anybody that calls themselves Israel. All right. So even in my neighborhood, and my brother Donnell knows, because we both are in the south suburbs of Chicago, in the southern section of Chicago, there are many Palestinians who live in this area. Many. This may be the highest number of them in maybe the whole U.S. I used to think it was Detroit, but I'm beginning to think the number of them here in the south suburbs of Chicago might actually be more than the ones in Dearborn, Michigan. I don't know. I'm speaking anecdotally. But anyway, it says that, that these people will despise you. Now, they won't despise you because you are so-called African American. That don't bother them. They won't despise you because you're a Christian. They certainly won't despise you if you're a Muslim. And they won't despise you because you're black. But if they hear you say you are a Hebrew Israelite, they will despise you for that. When they see that we so-called African Americans are actually Yahudah, the true Israelites, they despise us. I've encountered this. I and others of us have encountered some disdain personally from some of these Palestinian people in this area for this very reason here in Chicago. But even recently, in the last few weeks, in Chicago and Indianapolis, there have been violent reactions from the Palestinians toward Hebrew Israelites. A Hebrew Israelite place of worship was destroyed by a Palestinian in Indianapolis. They didn't make a difference between whether you are Hebrew Israelite or whether you're Israeli. They just hear Israel. And that has been in the news recently. Then also we know here in Chicago, there was a fight a few weeks ago, downtown Chicago, on Michigan Avenue. Palestinians threw a bottle at some Hebrew Israelites speaking on the street corner just a few weeks ago. They didn't know that those Hebrew Israelites are more opposed to the state of Israel than maybe even the Palestinians are. They don't care. They just hear you, Israel. They don't take time to talk about you're different than the Israelis. They just hear Israel. So whether you like it or not, they despise you. Also, the Targum text of Ezekiel 16:57 clearly shows that the true land of Israel borders the regions of the villages of the Palestinians, translated as Philistines, and the land of Syria in the so-called Middle East of today, because it says these people live currently around all sides of our homeland of Israel. So that's not the case in sub-Saharan Africa, which some Israelites believe is the land of Israel, even though there are no Syrian or Palestinian borders in sub-Saharan Africa. All right. So sub-Saharan Africa doesn't fit this description. And again, this is one of those difference of opinion we respectfully have with dear friends, brothers, and sisters who we dearly love and respect, but we got to go for what we know is true. But the Syrians and the Palestinians do border the land of Israel in the so-called Middle East, but not in sub-Saharan Africa. But these enemies, the Syrians and the Palestinians, do border the land of Israel in the so-called Middle East, which is the true land of Canaan. Currently, the war in Gaza has become a massive flashpoint in the world geopolitics, of which Ezekiel the prophet says is a sign that ultimately will lead up to Yahudah's return to the land of Israel. See, this is the sign. This is the sign of the timeline. When Yah says, I will bring you back when you are despised on all sides by the Syrians and the Palestinians. He's talking to Yahudah. He's talking to you. We've seen they have, even over here, despisers. And certainly they're despising us more over there because some of us from Dimona that had children, some of our children are in the Israeli army now. Some of the children of the Beta Israel philosophy in the Israeli army, they're seeing, when they see Israeli soldiers, they're seeing some actual Israelite, Black Israelite soldiers in the Israeli army now. As crazy as that is. So they're not, the Palestinians and the Arabs around the land of Israel there, you say you're a Hebrew Israelite, they're going to think you're a collaborator with the Jewish state of Israel. So they don't care. Just the fact that you call yourself Judah, they don't like that. But this is the timeline. When that happens, that's when Yah is saying here in the prophecy, it's now about that time you get ready to go back to your land and live in the midst of the captivities of Samaria and the captivities of Sodom. And you come in last. We come in last after these other people are already there. Because he says in verse 58 of chapter 16 of Ezekiel, verse 58 and 59 says, thou hast borne thy lewdness and thine abomination, said Yahudah. Yes, we've been lewd and abominable. Look at how we are in Atlanta. It's the black gay capital. Look at how we are. This is the transgender month, transgender awareness month. They always got our people doing abominable things in the gay pride parades. See, y'all saying that's why I'm gonna have to humble you. Talking about Judah, I'm bringing you back to the land last because of your lewdness and your abominations. Verse 58, saith Adonai Yah. Verse 59, for thou saith Adonai Yah, for thus saith Adonai Yah, I will even deal with you as thou hast done, which has despised the oath in breaking the covenant. So we have violated the covenant. Yet, in spite of Yahudah's sin guilt, Yah says in verses 60 through 63 of Ezekiel 16, that he would still remember his covenant with Judah, to bless us to rule over the other two states of Sodom, which is today Jordan, and Samaria, which is today the state of Israel. He's going to give us the power to rule over all of that. Because he says in verse 60, nevertheless, I will remember my covenant with you in the days of your youth. In verse 60, he says this, and I will establish unto you an everlasting covenant. Verse 61, that thou shalt remember thy ways and be ashamed when thou shalt receive thy sisters, thine older and thy younger, and I will give them unto thee for daughters, but not by thy covenant. And I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall know that I am Yahudah, that thou mayest remember and be confounded, and never open thy mouth anymore because of thy shame, when I am pacified toward thee for all that thou hast done, saith Adonai Yahweh. Now, the question is what is the covenant that Yah has made with Judah that makes us to become the ruling tribe over the entire land of Israel? We don't just come back to sit up under another state that's already there. He's not sending us back to sit up under the authority of the state of Israel. That's what went wrong with our brothers and sisters that went to Demon. They went back, but they went back to be under the authority of another man's government. And then those of us who are going to Jordan, we're going back to sit up under another man's government. We're going back to be up under the authorities of Samaria and Sodom. Yeah, I said, it's the other way around. You go back for them one day to be under your authority. According to Psalm 78, verse 55 through 72, it states this covenant that Yah made with Yahudah for you to rule that land, not to be just a subservient, begging other people for handouts, give you an absorption camp in a little desert town called Dimona. And then you just live on begging other countries to help you survive, or either putting your children in the army to be led by other people. That's not what Yah's covenant with Yahudah is. they're not living out the promise, the covenant. He said, I'm going to do this not by your covenant. That is, you're not setting the terms of this covenant. I am. Just because you go there and you're there doesn't mean that's the way I have you to go. Yah says, when you go back to rule, not to follow, not to be under these other people's authority. This is why, even though I respectfully disagree with my brothers who are talking about moving to Africa and to fulfill the prophecy, the thing is, they're going to move to Africa and be under the authority of these artificial governments that were left by the European colonizers. See, all of these countries they're going back to are artificial countries that didn't even exist before the colonial era of the European colonists. During the colonial era of the European colonists, these countries that they're moving into, South Africa, Kenya, Congo, Ghana, Nigeria, these countries did not exist under those arrangements until the British colonizers set those countries up. So you're just going back living under an artificial government set up by Europeans, even though it's run by people that look like you and me, and that many of them are Israelites like you and me. But you're still living in an artificial government of other people's arrangements. We are to be a free and independent people. We are to be a people in control, not a people just having to beg for visas. I got to beg them for a visa to get from Kenya to Congo. I got to beg Congo to get a visa to go to South Africa. We're not supposed to be living like that. Yeah, I said, when I put you in your land, people are going to come to you for the visa. People are going to come to you for the records of why they're coming into your land. Why go somewhere where you're under somebody else's authority? Yah said, I didn't give you that. According to Psalm 78, verse 55 through 72, it states the kind of covenant Yah made with you, the people of Yahudah. He says, verse 55, he cast out the heathen also before them and divided them in inheritance by line and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High Elohim and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When Elohim heard this, he was wroth and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and he delivered his strength into captivity and his glory into the enemy's hand. He gave his people over unto the sword and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. The priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Verse 65, then Yahudah awakened as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man that shouted by reason of wine, and he smote his enemies in the hinder parts. He put them to a perpetual reproach. Verse 67, moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph and chose not the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which he hath established forever. He chose Dawid, also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes, great with young. He brought him to feed Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hand. Notice in verse 68 that Yah chose Yahudah to rule over all of the tribes of Israel, just as Yaakov, our father, had prophesied over the tribe of Yahudah in Genesis 48, verse 8 through 10. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Yahudah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion and as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Also, it is stated in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 2, that the chief ruler of Israel would come out of Judah. It states in 1 Chronicles 5:2, for Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler. Hallelujah. Of this chief ruler out of Judah, it says in Revelation 5:5, behold, the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. Therefore, in conclusion, the covenant that Yah made with the tribe of Yahudah to take charge over all Israel, as Yah promised in Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 60 through 63, is confirmed in Messiah Yahusha, the Messiah Yeshua HaMashiach. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. And may Yah bless the fulfillment of his prophecy to come to pass in these last days. Praise Yah.